Thanks for tuning in to Rethinking the Dollar. Today I'm excited to have my guest, Mr. Iustin Rosioara, the author of God's Money, a Bible study focusing on gold and silver. Today Iustin joins us to share his most recent work. He has 30 plus years of industrial plant and development as well as electrical engineering. He also attended Bible school at Dartmouth School of Ministry in Romania. So today he joins us on Rethinking the Dollar to share his work, God's Money, as well as his thoughts on gold and silver in today's economy. So Iustin, welcome to Rethinking the Dollar.
Thank you, Mike. It's glad to be here. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I appreciate you taking time to sit down with us here to share your book, God's Money. Looking forward to definitely finding out more of the details of it, because I believe it's very important that people really understand the historical aspect from a biblical perspective on precious metals, ideally gold and silver. And so before we dive into the book any further, I want to get your thoughts on some rethinking the dollar questions. And the first question is, what comes to mind when Iustin hears the words rethinking the dollar?
Well, actually, I can make reference to the first time when I saw your channel. That why I clicked on it to see the videos is because I think it's we need now to think about the things that have changed, about different concepts. So when we talk about dollar, what is a dollar? And we know, if you look in history, dollar was a certain quantity of gold and a certain quantity of silver. And now it's something else. And to me, rethinking, it's actually about thinking back to what originally was. So I think it's very important that we understand the difference between what we once had and what we have now. So that's to me rethinking the dollar.
All right, I understand that. I understand completely. So part of the rethinking the dollar concept is being able to educate people from a historical aspect, as well as the importance of just understanding basic monetary and financial literacy. So in your opinion, why is understanding the importance of precious metals important in this time frame, and is actually very special to be able to look back and throughout history from a biblical standpoint?
Well, I think that I think it was Rabbi Daniel Lapin who said in one of his books that in an ever-changing environment, it is very important to define what we are not allowed to change. Because actually we need reference points, we need baselines, we need, is like a system that where we have to have an origin, something that we always relate to, a fixed point. Because otherwise, in a world where everything becomes relative, it's very easy to get confused. We have no solid ground. So to me, is like when we talk about precious metals especially, it's about going on a foundation that was there from the beginning, because precious metals served as money for thousands of years.
Right, I do agree. And so let's get into your book right away. So God's Money, a Bible study focusing on gold and silver. So what inspired that book, and how long did it take? I mean, what was the thought process behind putting together that book?
Well, it was a gradual process. It's not just one single thing, but it started, when I was a kid. Of course, we were always fascinated of something, that piece of jewelry, or, oh, that is gold, that is silver. Even maybe some silverware that were made of silver, they were in a special place other than just in the kitchen drawer. And then as I grew up, I could read about the stories about Klondike, about California first, and then Klondike and the gold rushes there. And it's like, made me think, what is so special with these metals, that, especially with gold, that people are willing to gamble their future, to maybe risk their lives just to get some ounces of that metal. And later on, as I try to understand money and the currency system that we're living in, I was so confused, because you see, I grew up in different systems. I mean, I grew up in communist Romania. Then I moved at the age of 25, I moved to Norway. And then I was there for 12 years. It was a different system for me. And then after that, I went back to Romania when the communism was over, and it was a kind of a wild capitalist system. And then in the last 6 years, I've been here in the United States. So I kind of experienced everything. So what I found out is that, there are so many theories about money, and it's like you have people, you have different experts, you have schools of thought, and people sit and debate for hours, and they don't bring you information. So that was the moment when I said, okay, mankind doesn't have an answer. That's obviously because, for thousands of years, billions of people made transactions daily. And we should know now what works or what doesn't. And that is when I started looking in the Bible.
Right.
And I couldn't find a dedicated Bible study about precious metals. It doesn't mean it's not there, it's just that I couldn't find it. And when I started to put together the verses that contain gold and silver, I ended up with 60 pages of Word documents. So then I understood, okay, that is definitely something worth looking into. And as I started to look at each verse and try to understand the context of that, then I had some interesting discoveries, and that is how I decided to share this with other people, because it was some amazing discoveries.
Right, I do agree. Now, the title of the book is God's Money, a Bible study focusing on gold and silver. Now, what if a person is not a Christian or they're of the Jewish faith, and so would the book still apply to them as far as getting an understanding from a monetary standpoint?
Yeah, I think definitely so, because even if a person doesn't consider Bible to be a sacred text, it's just a collection of writings from different people, we have to understand that this was written by around 40 people that lived over 2,000 years, on a time span of over 2,000 years, and they live in different places, they experience different cultures. So this is by far the best historical book, because it collects events, it collects people, it collects habits, and it collects transactions that no other history book recorded. So for anyone who is interested just from a historical perspective, Bible gives very good information.
Now, do you advocate, the idea of people going back to, 'cause we used to be on a gold standard years ago. So do you advocate people or our monetary system going back to where we actually carry physical gold and silver coins in our pockets or whatnot? Or how can that prior history of gold and silver be implemented to today's society possibly?
Well, yeah, I think it's all based on a confusion, because we mistake the value that we transfer with the technology that we use to transfer that value. Because throughout history, yeah, at some point in time, people were using coins and silver and gold, but society evolved. People started to move. First, they used donkeys and camels, and then they used horses and carriage. And then we got the trains, and we got the cars, and we have planes now. In communication areas, people were writing letters by hand, and the books were just handwritten manuscripts. And then we got the printing press, we got the telegraph, we got the typewriters, and now we have internet with email and instant communication, messaging, and all that. So because society moved in a certain direction, everything happened faster. Now we needed more efficient and expedient methods of transferring value, because every time a transaction is about goods or services going from seller to buyer and money moving back. So it's a question of how fast we move the value back to the seller. So carrying coin pouches in our pockets is about the technology we transfer. So all these technologies that were developed in time. We talk about digital accounts, we talk about credit debit operations, and even the cryptocurrencies with the blockchain technologies. All these are transaction, they are very good because they facilitate transactions very fast. And that's nothing that says that, okay, we cannot transfer value using modern technologies, and that value means actually some ownership rights over pieces of gold and silver, grams, milligrams, whatever we use, stored in different vaults. So with that distributed ledger and distributed storage, we solve the confidence problem. So we definitely could have that. So we don't need to carry around.
Right, I do agree. Now, if you look at the idea of gold from a historical viewpoint, it's first recorded in the doctrine of the Bible in Genesis, where God was quoted as saying that the gold is good. So does this mean that God was satisfied with gold in its entirety, or what are your thoughts about the idea that gold is good?
Well, one of the things that I did when I started to study, I started also when I studied the Bible, I started to look into the Hebrew text, because that's the original text, and we find out that when that gold is good, that word that means good, which is tov, has multiple meanings. So one of the things that I discovered looking at is that gold serves a purpose, because when God says something that something is good, it means that it serves a purpose, and then he activates a principle that makes sure that the purpose is fulfilled. So, for example, when God said that it is good that each fruit shall contain the seed, and each seed shall produce after its kind, it's actually God activates a principle for multiplication of life in the earth. So when God says that gold is good, basically we have to look at everything that happened in Genesis 1 and 2, because that was before the sin came in. And that shows the original intent of God. So God created the matter, the substance, and then he created man, and he gave a dominion mandate, which is to be fruitful, to multiply, to subdue, and to replenish. And that is actually a management for growth assignment that was given to mankind. But God put the matter, the substance, in place, and man is supposed to bring the work. So that these two things put together, that shows that this is the principle that is activated, that gold is good. Gold serves a purpose for value, because when nothing was growing in the earth until Adam was created. So that means that matter, substance, and work have to go together. So gold is good means that gold is valuable because it's part of something that God created, but that takes human work to find it, to extract it, to refine it. And so that is what means that gold is good. Right. It serves a purpose.
Fair enough. Now, serves a purpose. So what makes gold so different than other metals?
Well, first of all, it's rarity, it's scarcity. That's very important because it's around 4 parts per billion. That is how much gold is in the ground. So out of 1 billion grams, 4 of them are gold. And in some areas, of course, they are more concentrated than others. At the same time, it is insufficient. The supply is sufficient to serve as a medium exchange, as a valuable. But it has a high value because it's durable, and it's also very desirable. If we think rarity determines the price of a metal normally. So copper is much more abundant. It takes less to find it and refine it. Takes less work, less resources. So that's why it's cheaper. Gold is more expensive because of the same reason. So there are metals in industry that are actually more expensive than gold, but they are not desirable. So they don't have the same application because nobody wants to use them for jewelry or for something like that. So that is one thing, is scarcity. The second is the durability, is the fact that it resists any form of corrosion. So even if you take some gold coins that were lying on the bottom of the sea for 500 years, when you take them up, they may have some dust, some shells, some things, but when you clean them, then that gold shines equally as much as it was in the day that ship sank 500 years ago. But the third element that is also very important is the fact that gold does not combine chemically with anything else. So it's like any other metal that combines chemical with oxygen to make oxides and all kind of chemical combination. But gold does not. The only thing we can do with it is that we can melt together with different let's say with copper, and then we get these jewelry gold that we can get 22 carats, 18 carats, 14 or 10 carats, depending on how much copper we put together. But they are melt together and they solidify together, but there is no chemical combination between them. So that's purity. The fact that it does not combine with anything else to create another product, that makes gold so special. And actually, this is the reason why in the biblical context, gold represents purity or righteousness.
So earlier you hinted at the fact that the material substance as well as labor is kind of what makes up the idea of value. Can you expand on that a little bit? Why is that?
Well, because you cannot have one without, you cannot have value based on only one, because matter will stay in the ground. If there is no work involved, no matter what it is, it can be a gold mine, it can be a diamond mine, it can be whatever, without work, does not have any value because it just stays there. On the other hand, work without substance has no value either. And you know, we think of our services, for instance, when we buy certain services. Let's say for a barber, if we go, we consider it to be a pure service, right? Because he just cuts our hair, and then he still needs some infrastructure, things around it. He cannot just do it with bare hands. So whatever human activity is involved, whatever economic activity we talk about, it requires some material. So everything, and we can link that to what we talked about earlier, is that God created the matter, the substance, and man brings the work in the together with that. And that is how value is created, because we cannot separate them.
Right, that's very true. Now, we talked a lot about gold. Now, you know, gold has always been considered the money of kings, as well as silver being the money for the people. Now, what's the connection between gold and silver? Like, because a lot of people can't really afford to go out and buy gold for the most part, but silver at this current moment is affordable. So what's some of the benefits along with silver as well?
Well, I think that silver is definitely, it's around 20 times more available than gold in nature. So the ratio would be around 20, and maybe a little bit lower than that. It's like 1 to 15, depending on how easy it is to extract the silver, because you know, you cannot extract some places, you cannot extract the silver in the same quantity as you would like, because it's being cheaper is not profitable to do it. Yeah, right now it's, you know, we have to understand when we talk about price of silver and price of gold, we understand that there are two different things. One is the price of physical metal, and one is the price of future contracts that determines the spot price. So to me, silver has a much higher potential in the longer run, because at the ratio is around 80 to 1 now. Silver is very, very cheap. This is one of my positive shocks, if I can call it, when I started to study the original text, to find out that silver and money is the same word in Hebrew. So every time God uses the same word for two different concepts, it means that those concepts are very strong related. So that makes silver and money the same thing. So in God's, from God's perspective, silver would be the money. But because of the ratio, because of the availability of silver, which is around 20 times, whatever, 15, 20, somewhere there, it makes it cheaper. So it makes more suitable for everyday transaction. So when we read about silver being the currency of the merchants, if we look at those words in original Hebrew, it's about a medium exchange that is acceptable by people who travel. So that's kind of a paraphrasing of the translation. So it's definitely used for exchange for smaller transactions. So, and that's very important, because silver and money is the same thing in the Bible.
Interesting, interesting. Now, right now in 2018, a lot of people are excited about the idea of the blockchain and cryptocurrencies. So there's a lot of companies out there trying to link or back their tokens or coins with the metal itself. So do you think that that will be the future as far as, because you hinted at blockchain and crypto earlier. So share your thoughts with us on the whole idea of cryptocurrencies in relation to metals.
I think there will be, first of all, blockchain, it's a major disruptor. And I think it will reshape many technologies and many industries, because it allows transactions to happen in a completely different way. So what I think is that certain industries will develop management software solutions. It can be customer relationship, can be sales, transactions, orders, processing orders, and all that. So in all that management solution will be part of the blockchain, and that will involve some settlement that will allow, let's say, for instance, oil industry, to have something very specific to talk about. These are people who know their business. They are buying pumps. They are using gaskets, fittings, whatever parts they are using. And if you're buying services, for installations and maintenance and all that, these know exactly what is valuable, what is not valuable, what is more valuable than other things. So there will be, now they have to rely on their cash flow. They have to look at, they may have thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of receivable and payables. So that they have to talk to their accountants, and their decisions are made actually based on how much money they have available. And that will, I think this will be the major disruptor, because then the whole concept of cash flow will be redefined, because then it's like all these settlements will happen so quickly. And here I see the role of what I could call specialized cryptocurrencies. But then it will be a need for cryptocurrencies that are across the different platforms, across different industries. And there we will have the metals, which are kind of a baseline, because it's easy to relate to them. It's like, okay, we know that a gram of gold or an ounce of gold or a gram or ounce of silver it's a baseline for a value. That's what it is. We don't have fluctuating currencies. We don't have things that move all the time.
So I actually want to dive a little bit further into some of your findings in the book in reference to some stories or whatnot. So a story that comes to mind is referencing in the very beginning in Genesis, when Abraham was labeled as being so blessed and abundant, and the Bible mentions he was rich in cattle, silver, and gold. And so so what are your thoughts on what can be considered God's economic model, and is that model still relevant for this day and age we're in now?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest mistakes we can do, because when we talked in the beginning about the things that, how we apply the biblical things to today's life, because we think that something that happens thousands of years ago in agrarian societies are not relevant to us. But yeah, we have to look at the principles. So yeah, to cut a long story short, so Abraham was blessed in these three things: cattle, silver, and gold. And these reflect the three economic areas that are very valid both for individuals but also for communities or even nations. So cattle represents productivity, production. So it's a means of production. So in those days, it was either farmers, they were dealing with animals, or they were plant cultivators. So that was a production facility that was using this seed fruit contains the seed, and seed produces after its kind, because every animal could be used for breeding several generations. So it was something that sustained his life and his family life, but it also gave him a possibility for growth. It was something that kept growing. So production is one of the areas one of the economic areas that we need to to take into consideration. The second is silver, which is actually about exchange, because when he had so much meat and dairy and whatever he else had, he could barter with some other people so much, but excess, whatever he had in excess, he had to trade, to change, to get something that was both desirable and also something that was not perishable. So that is where silver comes in. That is the which means money. We talked earlier about it, and that is for exchange. So trade or exchange is the second economic area, and then the third, where gold is about, it's about wealth accumulation, because when he had enough silver, so he didn't need it anymore, so he would change it to gold, because it was, let's say, 20 times more expensive than silver. So that was a concentrated value. So that is something that he could keep for larger transactions. And when we look in the Bible, so it's clear a pattern where smaller transactions are expressed in silver, larger transactions are expressed in gold. And so then he could keep the gold as a wealth preservation, and also something that could be given to future generation. So that is the three economic areas, and we cannot do without one of them, because if we have production, but we don't have any way of accumulating the surplus, in our days it's clear the example of the middle class, that people, they have income, they have good jobs, but then everything is tied to paying taxes, mortgages, car loans, whatever else they finance, student loans, and whatever else they financed through the banks. And so in the moment they lose that production, then everything is a disaster. So then when they lose their income, so production is supposed to sustain, but also we need to trade to be able to change things. And if we have a lot of money, but we don't have a sustainable income, it's like the example of the lottery winners. People who make lots of money in a short time, and they suddenly feel that they can afford a lifestyle that is at very high level, and they do it for a while, but if there is not that income that comes in, then they will lose everything very shortly. So statistically, 70% of the lottery winners lose everything in 3 years. So that's the reason. Right. So we cannot have only one or two of them. We need all of them three. So it's production, trade, and then wealth preservation.
Right. Now, in this day and age, most people don't really understand the importance from a historical aspect of gold and silver that you've elaborated on. So all we know is paper and digits at this point. And so the name of the show is Rethinking the Dollar. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the idea of just solely having paper as our currency? Is that, what's your long-term thoughts about people having all their wealth in just paper or digits?
Well, we have to look at what kind of assets are we talking about? Because assets that have intrinsic value then these are assets that have that satisfy a need. And let's say a house, it provides shelter. So that's the value that stays with a house. A piece of gold is something that is desirable. So and the value stays with the gold. The other things that we talk about, papers, especially in the time we live today, when we use currencies, actually, not money, all these are obligations of payment. So we transfer liabilities, and digits is the same with so we can have a lot of financial assets, and we can feel at some points very wealthy, but those financial assets depend very much of the ability of some other third party to perform. And let's say that a bank is giving us a mortgage loan, and it's an asset for the bank because they count on the borrower to be able to pay the mortgage. Now, a person that goes and signs for a mortgage counts on his employer to pay his salary. His employer counts on being able to sell goods and his customers to pay him. So it's a chain. We have to understand that it's a difference between having assets and having a chain of liabilities. Because at some point, if something happens, then in that chain of liabilities is broken, then we're sitting with nothing. And another thing that we have to think about is that all these financial assets that we hear about, especially those derivative products and that are out there in hundreds of trillions of dollars, they are just numbers in computers. They are not always assets that serve a need or satisfy a need of someone, for someone. So that's why they are very volatile. So I think someone who is relying totally on paper assets, I call them financial products, regardless if they are on paper form, if they are on digital form in computers, they are very vulnerable. So they risk a lot to lose everything or to lose most of it.
Right. I do agree. Now, as we draw towards the end of our conversation today, I want to get your thoughts. So, using another biblical reference about Joseph and his interpretation of Pharaoh's dream and how he kind of predicted or he interpreted that a famine was coming. And so nowadays we would call it a recession, or some people may say a Great Depression. And so we are in that time frame now, I believe. Now, so how can we learn from this biblical model of economic cycles in relation to what happened then with a famine in comparison to what's currently underway now with this recession people say is coming?
The story of Joseph is very interesting to listen. He's an example in many, many ways. But what we're talking about is, and for those who are maybe not familiar with the whole sequence of events, so Joseph was in jail, and Pharaoh, who is the ruler of Egypt, had two dreams. So first dream is like 7 fat, nice cows come out of the river Nile, and then 7 ugly, skinny cows come after them, and the skinny cows eat the fat cows, and the skinny still remain skinny. And then it's like Pharaoh wakes up and he's wondering what this is about, goes back to sleep, and he dreams again about 7 grains that come out of the ground. They are very nice and beautiful, and then it's like 7 dry and ugly grains of wheat come again, and the ugly ones eat. The same happens again. So the ugly ones eat the nice ones, and they stay ugly and dry. And he was so disturbed about that, and Joseph is brought from jail and to interpret the dream. And he says that, okay, first thing is the fact that you are dreaming 2 times. It's clear that it's gonna happen. So here's what God is telling you through these dreams. There is coming 7 years of abundance, and followed by 7 years of famine, or what we would call a crisis. And okay, so what do I do? Asked Pharaoh. And Joseph said, okay, that's a simple solution. What you have to do is you take 20% in those years of abundance, you take 20% of the grains of the harvest, put it in storage, so you have in the times of scarcity. Okay, so that was a good idea. Pharaoh was happy. He didn't have a PhD with a master of economics or a Nobel Prize winners in economics who would find out other systems of solving the problem. So he was very happy. He said, okay, let's do it, and I'm going to put you in charge. So Joseph, who woke up that morning in jail, now he became prime minister. So that's the lesson that we need to understand, and that's valid for us individuals and also for the whole nation. So that's a simple, and it's a very simple common sense solution. It's like, okay, you save in the times you have good times, and then when the contraction comes, then you have enough to to make it through. But there is another thing that is very important to learn from this, because with all the good things we can say about Joseph, him being actually the right hand of the Pharaoh, he was actually the government. So we read in the Bible that during those 7 years, he collected all the silver in the land. So because people were so desperate to get food, and they didn't have any reserves, they came and paid to buy the grains. So he actually took control of the whole economic of the country. So that shows that if we as individuals are not prepared for these tough times when we expect them to come, then we are at the mercy of the government. And we can all recall what happened in 2008, 2009, and not only in the United States, everywhere, everybody came to the government and we need to bail out this industry, we need to bail out that industry. Everybody wanted to handouts from the government. So, and those handouts don't come without conditions. So normally there are always strings attached to those handouts. Right. So that's the biggest lesson that we should take, that we need to be prepared for a difficult time.
Right, I do agree. Well, Iustin, Rosioara, the author of God's Money, a Bible study focusing on gold and silver, thank you for joining us here on Rethinking the Dollar. It's been a blessing to find out the biblical aspects of precious metals, rather. So I'm looking forward to definitely staying in touch with you and definitely diving into your book further. Before I let you go, any last thoughts you want to leave us with?
Well, I can make reference to my website. That's because there I have some books that are out there. That is my 4th book. So everybody who goes to masteringthehumanexperience.com, and there on the website there is a link under resources, all my books. And if I would say something, I would say to people, continue to be truth seekers, because we are eager to quote Jesus' words that the truth shall make you free, but the truth will set you free. But we don't quote the whole thing, because the whole thing says, you shall know the truth and the truth will make you free. In other words, is the truth by itself doesn't set you free. It's the truth that you know that sets you free. Because if you don't know it, you won't be a free person. So that's what I would say is like, and that's why I'm actually very grateful for the opportunity to come here, because when I saw what you stand for and what you show and what you teach, and I said, okay, definitely this is something that is very good, and more people should hear about these things.
Right. Well, Iustin, it's been a pleasure having you on. As I mentioned, definitely, if anybody's have any interest in reference to the books, you can find the links down below. Definitely want to share that information. So, Iustin, thank you for taking time to sit down with the Rethinking the Dollar audience. Good luck with everything, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike.